Now, the one and only Ghadi Francis joins us from the Middle East somewhere. I'm not sure if she's in Beirut. She often is, but wherever she is, she's going to tour the Middle Eastern horizon with us. Ghadi, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with Jerusalem, if we may. One of the last speeches I gave in the British Parliament sought to warn the parliamentarians that Jerusalem was a powder keg which could not just explode but could envelop not just the region but draw in the world, being the epicenter of religious faith, being the holiest of places in the holiest of lands. And yet, these holy places are now being routinely desecrated, threatened, undermined, and that powder keg looks ready to blow to me. How does it look to you?
Well, I couldn't agree more, actually. Hello, Mr. Galloway. The pleasure and honor is always mine to be on the mother of all talk shows. I send the regards of everyone in Beirut, and I'm speaking from Beirut today. Actually, in front of me is a book called How Long Will Israel Survive? It's from Oxford, and the writer is a journalist in The Economist. On that note, I wanted to start because this is what I've been reading. They have been doing this apartheid way of dealing with Palestinians. The atrocities continue, places of worship, kids, women, civilians, journalists, and everything is becoming worse by day by day, year by year, to the extent that now the threat is from within. Israel started on a self-destruction manner because when they started this occupation in our region, it was under a certain banner of secular Zionism, of a refuge for the Holocaust survivors, of etc., etc., etc. 7 years into the occupation, they have become worse than what they fled. The atrocities that they have been doing, and never before did they not care about their image internationally. We saw what they did to Shireen Abu Akleh. 1 week after murdering Shireen Abu Akleh, they murdered another journalist on the Flag Day race. There was hardly any journalist, any correspondent that wasn't harassed and tackled, and they threw bottles at some France 24 correspondent. They tackled physically the Al Jazeera correspondent. These were not the happenings before. And this can only go one way from here, because if you look at it demographically, if you look at it historically, if you look at it from the human rights angle, no matter what angle you take, this cannot prevail. Evil cannot prevail. Killing innocent people cannot prevail. Getting the way people are marching the streets, these far-right groups, far-right Israeli groups, even the Israelis themselves do not accept it. There is an inter-Israeli problem. There is this political delusion that they're going through. If you look at the Israeli polls and the Israeli press following each and every, they're not safe anymore. People are not safe anymore. Seculars are not safe anymore. LGBTQ are not safe anymore. This before, even Netanyahu himself, according to that book, after 2015, it so became that Israeli leaders had to follow the crowd in being as Nazi as possible, as rightists as possible, as even killing of innocent people had to be covered up and had to be rallied, whereas it wasn't even the same before that. And I think every year, last year, what they did to Al-Aqsa Mosque came after like an accumulation of Sheikh Jarrah, of attacks here and there, and it resulted in Saif al-Quds, and it was a war that they lost. And for the past 2 decades, please tell me, which war did Israel win? In Lebanon, in 2000, they lost. They left our country the occupied places. In 2006, they were shamed. They were beaten a big defeat. Now, every now and then you see a drone. One simple Hezbollah drone named Hassan drone. 45 minutes. No Iron Dome could hunt it. No security check could hunt it. It stayed. So people are not safe anymore in that so-called only democracy in the Middle East, and its so-called only democracy is not a democracy anymore. Not when you have these rightist groups screaming death to Arabs in the street. Not when you have cold-blooded murder of a correspondent, a journalist, an American passport-holding journalist. And I want to tell you one thing, Mr. George, just to end on that note. The day Shireen Abu Akleh was the day of her funeral, these areas inside Jerusalem that the people were there, the people were holding her coffin and marching, these were areas that Palestinian people were not being able to march freely in for decades before that. And this is why they had to bring in all the army and even attack people who were just attending the mass, attending the funeral, because the sight of people, civilians, peaceful people walking there was actually freeing parts of Jerusalem. So this is demography now speaking, and the act of biology itself says that Israel is on its self-destruction path already, and it's a matter of time.
I'm glad that you brought up the intra-Israeli conflicts, which, as you describe, are now breaking out with a great deal of vehemence. In Haaretz, the leading Israeli newspaper, this week, they carried an editorial, not an op-ed, I should call it, which they showcased on their front page, which said that Zionism had been a mistake, that it had produced a mutant Jewishness, which contravened virtually everything about Jewishness. Everything about religious Jewishness was contravened by the viciousness which has been produced by Zionism. And Haaretz, and of course we frequently interview some of their writers, is perhaps ahead of the game, but not by that far. It is becoming increasingly obvious that no people that regards itself as truly religious, like the many of these Hasidic sects, like the Neturei Karta and so on, or truly progressive, truly liberal, truly leftist, can have anything to do with thousands, tens of thousands of flag-waving fanatics chanting death to Arabs. Shireen is dead, and a little boy that they murdered is on the grill because, of course, they burned him to death and so on. That doesn't, you can't coexist in one people. Two very dramatically different kinds of people, can you? Yes, Ghadi is back. Ghadi, did you catch my
Yes,
not
I
so
did.
much a question as a series of observations? Yes, please respond.
Yes, I did. And actually, this is why I came here to quote one of the studies. The base of Zionism, when they started, what is Zionism? As a beginning, it was like a movement in Europe to find a place to hold this arrangement for Jews and make this. Today it's a different. The founders were secular in a way, and this is what their studies, Israeli studies, are writing. Today it's highly contradictory. You cannot say there's a liberal Zionist. And this is why exactly the points that you stated. This is why the end is very near, because there's no more identity in that anymore. And even on polls that were held, polls that were held for Jews across the world, the Jew diaspora, the basic support for Zionism has a totally different, alienated perspective on what is happening or what they want to happen on their so-called homeland. It is very different. The status quo on the land is very different. And we must recall that in the elections in the 2014 elections, I think, there was this video it's just a typical ad video under the name "What is Zionism?", where some politicians were answering what Zionism was for them. It was a house to maintain that no one can transfer their money. It was security for all the citizens of the state. It was responsibility for these people. Now, 70 years in, they couldn't do anything. If we don't want to speak about the security issues, we can speak about the economic issues. They're every day they're not safe. The feeling of they're not safe. Plus, what Naftali Bennett did. Naftali Bennett was a rallied right leader that some people liked, but like he's for his statesmanhood, it was a matter of question for people. Now, when he is the head of the government, this person is a person who said in the United States, he said like bluntly, today, the era of secular Zionism is over. He said it in a Saban forum in Washington in late 2014. This man that told the world modern Zionism is all about creating a shelter for Jews. It was a secular approach that had the audacity to change history. But 100 years on, the reason we are in Israel is not because it's a shelter. So he's changing what the basic identity of Zionism was. So what they stood on the land or the ground or the debate or the argument that they stood on 70 years ago is not here anymore. The argument today is hate, 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 kill, 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 being a fanatic. And this will take them into one place only. Any sane Israeli person, any sane secular person is packing now, is trying to find their place elsewhere, and fanatics will stay. And fanatics cannot win a war when they are overnumbered.
Well, that is, of course, one of the problems that the best people in Israel leave, and I have known many of them. I was for a time frequent visitor to Tel Aviv, to Sheinkin, where I had some very good friends who were very active supporters of the Palestinian rights and the Palestinian cause. All such people have long left Israel because of the rise and rise and rise of this now hegemonic extreme. Even Bennett did not want that flag-waving disgrace on the National Flag Day. Even Bennett did not want that. I'm sure about that. But he's not strong enough to say so. He's not strong enough to stop it, because these people are becoming more and more and more the real power in Israel. Last word to you, Gadi.
Even when we speak that Bennett couldn't control it today, we are speaking about Bibi. Even Benjamin Netanyahu, the once different leader that had he had a feud with army leaders when the IDF soldiers used to assassinate people. Even Benjamin Netanyahu has to go with the flow if he wants to persevere like in politics. So now the fanatics are leading the politics of Israel, and this is its destruction. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and always a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for bringing us up to date.